Hey everybody, it's Mr. Stafford, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about the presidencies of William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson. So last time we talked about Teddy Roosevelt, and Teddy Roosevelt, remember, had become president with the assassination of William McKinley. He served the rest of William McKinley's term, nearly the entire term, and then he ran for re-election in 1904 and won. So he had been president for almost 2 complete terms. He had toyed with the idea of running again in 1908, but ultimately decided to not run again for president in 1908. Instead, he has a hand-picked successor in William Howard Taft. Now, William Howard Taft is a little bit more conservative than Teddy Roosevelt, not quite as progressive, although he will enforce antitrust legislation far more aggressively than Teddy Roosevelt did, not distinguishing like Roosevelt did between good trusts and bad trusts. So let's talk a little bit about Taft. William Howard Taft, again, had an appeal with the conservative wing of the Republican Party, but he had progressive bona fides as well. And one of those I've already mentioned is he really used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up trusts, to really challenge the powers of some of the most powerful monopolies and monopolists in the United States at that time. John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil would be one prime example. Taft was able to convince the Supreme Court to get Standard Oil, Rockefeller's mega trust, and one that Roosevelt had considered to be a good trust. The Supreme Court ordered them to break up into multiple companies as they were in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Another progressive cause that was supported by Taft was the passage of the 16th Amendment. Prior to the passage of the 16th Amendment, the Supreme Court had ruled it unconstitutional for the federal government to tax an individual's income. And so this progressive amendment is going to allow the federal government to tap into a steady and consistent stream of revenue in order to help them to regulate and get more involved, as the progressives had been asking for during this era. With the steady revenue of an income tax, the government will grow in size and scope. Ultimately, though, Taft has a very different view of his role as the president. Whereas Teddy Roosevelt believes that he can do anything that he wants to do as long as it's in the interest of the people, William Howard Taft really viewed the Constitution as a ceiling of presidential power, not a floor, that he could only do what the Constitution explicitly said he could do. So he was a much less powerful and forward president than Teddy Roosevelt was. This annoyed Teddy Roosevelt, and there was a rift within the Republican Party, within the progressive wing of the Republican Party. Taft gravitated more towards the conservative side, Roosevelt more towards the progressive side. So in 1912, we have a presidential election. William Howard Taft is running for re-election, and Teddy Roosevelt decides to come back and challenge him. And the Republicans go ahead and nominate William Howard Taft, and Teddy Roosevelt mounts a third-party challenge, creating what becomes known as the Bull Moose Party, officially known as the Progressive Party. And he's trying to take with him the progressive wing of the Republican Party. So the Republican Party is going to be split between Taft and Roosevelt. And that's ultimately going to contribute to the victory of the Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. Let's talk about the other candidates in this election as well. So I just mentioned Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson and a fourth candidate, the socialist candidate, Eugene V. Debs. Looking at these 4 candidates, we get a good picture of the political spectrum in 1912. At one end, you had William Howard Taft representing kind of a conservative, traditional approach to government's role in the economy. On the other end of the spectrum, you had the socialist, Eugene V. Debs, who advocated for the abolishment of our free market capitalist system in favor of a government-controlled and regulated socialist system. And while those two ended up being the outliers, there was also some debate with the 2 candidates that were closer to the center, and that would be Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson proposed a program that he called New Freedom. And Woodrow Wilson seemed to be just about as afraid of big government as he was of big corporations. And so the Democratic approach that was favored by Woodrow Wilson was a more traditional approach. Beef up the antitrust laws, help workers to unionize and organize, encourage and create conditions that would be conducive to the starting and flourishing of small businesses to kind of retrieve some of the power that the people had lost to the corporations. It was a fairly conservative approach. Roosevelt, on the other hand, offered a program called New Nationalism. And Roosevelt's New Nationalism argued that it would only be the strength of a strong and controlling government that could restore liberty to the oppressed, he said. That the government was the only entity powerful enough to do battle with these powerful monopolists, and therefore it was the government's responsibility to do that. So it's a more moderate version of what was kind of happening at the extremes of this debate. Although he did not go to the extremes that Debs did, Roosevelt's Progressive Party proposed a very progressive platform. They called for the creation of a democratic welfare state. They advocated for women's suffrage. They advocated for an 8-hour workday. They advocated for a living wage, a minimum wage. They advocated for workers' rights, unionization. And these progressive causes galvanized the progressive wing of the Republican Party, which threw all of their support towards Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican vote, which meant that Woodrow Wilson received enough votes to win the presidency. The Democratic Party did not split between Wilson and Debs the way that the Republican Party split between Roosevelt and Taft. This meant that in 1912, Woodrow Wilson won the presidency and became president in 1913. Some of Wilson's policies end up pretty much in line with what Teddy Roosevelt had been proposing. He will support an increased income tax. He will support the establishment of a Federal Reserve System, basically a new national bank. He will support the establishment of the Federal Trade Commission. And so there's a lot of new types of executive branch activity taking place where the government is becoming more and more involved in regulating the economy of the United States. In addition to that, Wilson is the first president to hold regular press conferences, communicating directly with the people via the press. So while Wilson's presidency will be dominated by World War I or the Great War, and we'll learn about that in the next chapter, he is also the last of the progressive presidents. We're going to see with the changing of the decades into the 1920s, an end of the progressive era, and Wilson will be our final progressive president. All right, so take a look at the book. You're going to get a lot more detail from the reading on all of these things than I've given you here. So go ahead and do a good reading of the chapter, and I will see you next time.